are not spirit fingers. These are spirit fingers. And these are gold.
Welcome to the Objective Secure Podcast. My name's Mike.
And I'm Emma.
And this is episode 25, Spirit Fingers. We're going to be talking about spirit of the game and playing within that spirit of the game. It kind of ties into sportsmanship to some degree. We got a question from a follower of the show, and we thought, you know what, that's a topic we can't really answer live on air like we normally do on a Wednesday night, so we turn it into a podcast episode. So we're going to be talking about spirit of the game and do players take advantage of it, and so on. So before we do, though, do you want to start filling us in on what we've been up to in the last couple of weeks?
I don't know what you've been up to. You've been up to sticking your fingers in places where they don't belong and doing anything you possibly
sure you want to have that on audio?
Anything you possibly can to get out of doing work. And
That's not true at all.
I've been organising Southern Hemisphere Open.
It's not my fault I took a chunk out of my finger.
No, it is your fault.
Well, yeah, it is my fault.
It is your fault.
But it's not my fault it's taking a little while to heal. I'll make sure there's a photo in the show notes, so if you're squeamish...
No, don't do that. There's no need for that.
Yes, I had to go and have my finger operated on because I took a chunk out of it.
Yes. The things that this man will do to get out of...
Hey, that's not true. I have been doing things.
Anyway, so Southern Hemisphere Open is now less than 4 weeks away.
It is. And... yeah, we've got the show bag in the works now. I will make sure there's a photo of that in the show notes. So you
Not
can.
yet.
The bag itself we've previewed on the webpage.
Yeah,
it's
right.
fine. We've got some really cool stuff going in the bag this year. We've had our first batch of giveaways from one of our sponsors come through today, which we haven't announced yet, but we'll make sure that goes up in the next few days. And we have several more of those currently winging their way towards Perth, Western Australia at the moment. We've got a sample for something that's meant to be going in the bag that's still not here, which is making us panic a little bit.
Yeah, that's why I don't want to share anything because I'm so petrified that it's not going to turn up in time.
I'm really hoping it does turn up in time.
Me too.
Given we've already paid for all the setup costs and all the rest of it. But we'll see what happens.
Not even because of that, just because I'm excited by it.
Yeah, it is really cool. And look, you're more than welcome to put some guesses as to what we could be putting in the bag this year.
I was actually at my parents' house for dinner tonight while Mike was somewhere else. And my mum goes, "Oh, I saw you put up on Facebook the picture of the bag and guess what's inside. That was a really good idea. Did you just get people to put up guesses so you could go, oh, that's an idea, right, let's buy that." So next year, that's what we're going to do.
Okay, we can do prizes.
Although I think that the ideas that people put forward were...
Titans.
No, I was more thinking about the Bucky and Roblin plush toys, which then turned into we should do a 6-foot Jake plush toy.
Yeah, so if you've not seen this, and we might even try and grab a photo of this, we have a very long-term supporter of ours in the name of, his name's Jake. And Jake, well, this will make a nice segue, actually, I've just realised.
It will. I know, do you like how I lined that up for you? It was totally well thought out.
So, yeah, Jake's not a short man by any stretch of the imagination. He's got to be a good 6'4", 6'5", 200 centimetres would be my guess. He's a big, big man. And we've got some pull-up banners.
You make him sound like he's about 8 foot wide. He's just
he's
really tall.
Yeah, he's really tall. And we've got a pull-up banner that's probably it's a life-size representation of him because when it was printed, it's literally life-size. And we've got a photo of him posing in front of his own pull-up banner. And there's been a conversation of doing a Jakeception where we kind of get a new photo each year in front of the next pull-up banner. So, yeah, that's going to be an interesting...
It's not happening, just so you know.
Oh, that's a shame. He'll be disappointed.
Yeah.
But speaking of Jake, him and his business partner, Matt, are almost poised now to open the doors to Beyond Games and Hobby, which is our new hobby store located down in Bunbury in Western Australia. It's about an hour hour and 40-minute drive from our house.
2 hours and 20 minutes if I'm driving.
An hour and 40 if I am and doing the speed limit.
Yeah.
It's just over 2 hours outside of the Perth Central Business District. It's just 2.5 hour drive, depending on which way you take it. And it's looking really cool. They've been sharing photos on their Facebook page, so if you want to go and check it out, it's Beyond Games and Hobby. And it's a big store, actually. They've got about 10 tables set up. They're doing a tournament for their soft launch, which is going to be on the 8th of September. And then, from what I understand, they're going to do a proper store birthday opening type thing post-show, because they're coming up to show to basically get the word out among the gaming community while they're all in one spot. And on the same day, which is going to be a busy day for us, we've got another store birthday, but this is the 20th anniversary birthday.
Yeah.
So this is Games Workshop's Perth store, which is the original store that opened here 20 years ago on the 8th of September.
I'm not sure if it actually opened on the 8th of September. The chances of... But anyway,
I reckon
they're celebrating the birthday.
I reckon
on the
there's a
8th.
pretty good guess that it's around that date.
It's around that
within
date.
Within a day or two, I would suspect.
But I'm guessing that they're celebrating the birthday on the Saturday because it's a Saturday.
Yeah. So that store was our first one that we got here in Perth. So it's been there. It's moved around a few times.
It hasn't been there, but yeah.
But yeah, we've had our first Games Workshop store open 20 years ago. I was at that store opening.
And we spoke about that in the 2 episodes that we were joined by Tim.
Yes.
When you reminisced about the
Old Hammer
days of past.
So we're going to go down on the Saturday to the store birthday and sort of be there and celebrate with, from the sounds of it, a few old staff members coming along and returning.
So.
Obviously, the current staff members should be there.
Well, at least one of them will, because the store's open.
Oh, look, I've invited friends to come to that who don't necessarily game anymore, just to be part of it.
But it was just part of their...
Yeah, it was certainly part of our... Yeah. So I'm hoping that they get a big turnout and it gets a bit crazy. We're going to be there they're doing a big group photo and a few other things in the day. So we're going to be there for that. And then I'm going to drop Emma home and then do the mad dash to Bunbury to catch the end of Beyond Games and Hobbies sort of soft opening day. And they're running a tournament that day. So I'll be down to hopefully catch the winners and check out the store and do some live streaming as well, which will be really cool. So it's going to be a busy day that day, because that's going to be me driving for about 6.5 hours that day. Yeah,
so if you're somewhere near Bunbury, pop in, say hello to the boys
to Jake
down
and
at
Matt, yep.
Beyond Games and Happies. If you are near the city, near the Perth store, 1 o'clock they're doing the commemorative photo. On their Facebook page, they've got events running for the whole day.
Yeah, they've got a Kill Team event happening in the afternoon. They've got a few bits and pieces.
An Age of Sigma event happening, I think, just before lunch. They've got pre-release, obviously.
Yeah, there's a pre-order.
Orders are going in that day as well.
I don't know what that'll be. They haven't really told us what that is yet, but it's still a few weeks out. If we know first, we'll let you know. Yeah,
because Mike was really good at keeping secrets.
So, it's going to be a busy day, that 8th of September, and that's only sort of a couple of weeks out of show as well. So, we've got most of the players packs and everything sorted now. There's only a couple outstanding, one of which is X-Wing, which is a real frustration at the moment because they released the new version of the game the week before show. Yeah. So we've got a preliminary players pack sorted for that, which is fairly vague. It's using the first edition tournament guidelines that Fantasy Flight published, and I've kind of stripped out a bunch of the references it makes to the first edition. I know roughly how many points the new competitive play is going to be, so we're going to put something out and cross our fingers. Because no one knows what that looks like yet. We will hopefully get a copy of the app that they're releasing to go alongside it on day of release. And look, I'm assuming that in terms of scoring and running a tournament, none of that should really change. It'll be more down to giving players a week to learn the new game. Yeah, I think it'll be the week to learn the new game and any potential changes to points and things like that that are likely to be introduced. And oh no, the whole point system's changing, and it's going to be full on. So I think it'll be a fairly soft tournament as everyone just kind of learns what they're doing. Yeah. There's obviously a level of investment from players as well to get the new rules and the new cards and the new upgrades and all the other bits and pieces you need. Because they've done what Malifaux did between first and second edition, where you can just buy the cards separately. You can buy a deck that covers either the Imperial, the Scum and Villainy, or the Rebels, so that you can just buy the cards you need as opposed to buying whole new fleets. Ships. Yep. The ships themselves are still compatible, although I was looking at the Fantasy Flight Games webpage, and they were saying that the new X-Wings, the wings will actually fold, so you can have them flat or in attack position in the X shape, which is pretty amazing given the scale of those models and the fact they're pre-painted. So, yeah, don't look at me like that. Yes, I'm a little bit excited that the X-Wings move. That's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. I shall try and contain my excitement.
She's not a Star Wars fan, people, I know. It's weird. Who can say that, honestly? At least for the original trilogy.
But they're not a Star Wars fan?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know a few.
Then they're all wrong.
Okay.
For the original 3.
I haven't seen the original 3.
I don't know if we can be married anymore.
I'm okay with that.
Well, since she's not getting a divorce out of me that easily.
Not this close to a show.
No.
You'll keep me around for a bit longer.
At least until after, end of the year. I think we'll get to there. We'll see how we go.
Right, okay. I've been put on notice.
Apart from that, yeah, we've been focused solely on what's going to happen at show, what events. We've got a huge RPG section now up on the webpage.
So big.
Big thanks to Matt and Micah for putting all that together. It's absolutely amazing what they've done. If you're interested...
Oh, there is actually something... So there's a couple of things happening. Sorry to cut you off there. So I already spoke about the fact that we've got the con-created content that is happening, being premiered for Adventurers League.
Yep.
Also, on the website at the moment, it still says, I think, placeholder for Jim. That's going to be My Little Pony.
What?
My Little Pony RPG. It's so exciting.
Oh, God.
Yeah, shut up. You got your flappy wings for your X-Wing, okay?
So if you're a brony, or if you're just into My Little Pony in general, or you've got kids who want to come along and play My Little Pony RPGs...
I do need to check that, because I'm not sure whether or not it is aimed at kids or it is aimed at adults. Because I know that there are a fair few adults that play the My Little Pony games. So.
It's probably worth knowing beforehand.
Yeah, it really is.
So, yeah, we've got a full 3 days worth of RPG action, which is really awesome.
And there's panels, there's short intro games, there's longer games, there's, workshops as well, how to DM, that kind of thing. So
we've also
it's really exciting.
We've also got Little Robot returning again for 2018 coming to show with all their Gunpla and manga goodness. So Chris, who was at the stall for 2 days last year, is now looking after Little Robot full time. And he's very excited to come back and bring a whole bunch of cool models.
Oh, he's so lovely.
He's awesome. They're going to be giving us some special stuff to give away as well over the weekend, so watch this space for what they're going to give us. They did a really cool freebie last year for
VIP
VIP bags, and then for anyone to come down and build a free Gundam.
Yeah, that was awesome.
So they're still putting together the finishing touches on what they're doing for this year, so as soon as we know, you'll know. Mm-hmm. But look, we might take a quick break and then come back with this full question in its entirety and try and break it down a bit and just talk a little bit more about the spirit of the game.
We're back.
Well, on that ominous topic, on an ominous note, I should say, we're going to start talking about this question, which was sent to us. It was actually via one of our live segments that we do every second Wednesday, and it's from about 4 weeks ago now, from a listener, Tim. Not Tim who was on the episode, but another Tim. There's plenty of Tims in this world, I'm sure.
Not as many as there are Michaels, but there you go.
Apparently not, yeah. So why don't you give us the whole question? We did try and vaguely answer this, but it was kind of...
No, we didn't try and vaguely answer it. I'll tell you what, I'll give you the question and then I'll give you the answer that you shared on the actual Facebook episode.
This will be good. I like this.
So this was the question. Where do you stand on the idea of gamers always trying to game the system? Do you think it's enough to trust people to play in the spirit of the game, or do you think more hard and fast rules need to be adopted? Mike's response, absolutely. That was it. And then moved on to the next question.
Are you sure that was what I said?
I am 100% positive.
I actually want to go back and rewatch that.
You may have said, absolutely, Tim. I do think they do.
If I could find the timestamp for that, I might even be able to get the audio out of the video so I can clearly tell you what I said.
You said absolutely. That was your response.
I'm going to go and check that.
Yeah.
Of course, if you're listening to this and it's not in the episode now, you'll understand.
Yeah,
I checked
you know
and
that I
was
was
right.
right. Okay, so the question was, where do you stand on the idea gamers always try to game the system? So I think before we start, it's useful to actually define what does that mean, game the system.
I think there's, even within that question, there's a multitude of possibilities, because gaming the system is ultimately going to be defined by the context in which the game is being played. Because if you're trying to game the system, as in find the loopholes and silliness with your buddies, I think you're playing the game for the wrong reason. I think this reference more applies to competitive play, regardless of game system.
Mm-hmm.
You think that's fair?
Well, so I think my definition of game the system, I think, that you've summed that up around trying to find the loopholes, and I've heard it also called trying to break the system.
Yeah, well, the second part of the question is, do you think it's
we're not up to that yet.
Hang on.
I've got
I'm trying to give you context. My gosh. The next part of the question is, do you think it's enough to trust people to play in the spirit of the game? So I think that ties into gaming the system, in that you're trying to play the way the game was intended, not necessarily the way it's strictly written.
But going back a second to something that you mentioned before, which was around if you're trying to exploit loopholes and you're doing that when you're playing with your mates, then you're doing it wrong. But this relates to gaming in tournaments. Do you think that it makes a difference?
Yeah, well, when you're playing at a tournament, I think the expectation is that you should be playing fairly and up front. I mean, the problem you have with any war game is that there are always... The rules are not just the rules of a game like, football or, motorsport or whatever. Those rules are the rules of the event, which is, I suppose, the players' pack in our world.
Mm-hmm.
Where if you're in a motorsport, you get the players' pack for the league. You know how many CCs for the engines. You know how many tyre changes you get. You know all that sort of stuff like you would for a tournament. How many points and so on. The difference is that you then have another set of rules that you use at the table compared to getting in a car and driving, with a handful of rules about don't crash into each other and those sorts of. I think you've got two different sets of rules that you have to consider for tournament play. And I think this question refers to the rules of the game, not the rules of the event. Which
then brings it back to, actually, in that case, there is no difference between doing that with mates and doing it in an event.
Well, I think there is, though, because I think you're more likely to be lenient with the way things are written if you're going to create a cool moment with your mates than you are to be at a tournament where someone tries to pull something that strictly in the rules works, but you don't feel like it should.
Yeah, I don't know.
So when it starts talking about, do you think it's enough to trust people to play in the spirit of the game?
Yeah.
Or make hard and fast, or more hard and fast rules need to be adopted. Let's look at the best example I can think of with the hard and fast rules scenario is War Machine. The Mark II was the one I was most familiar with. I've got the rulebook for Mark III. The rules for that are very clear cut. There's very few rules ambiguities when you first read through the core rules. It's only when you start adding the characters and the units that you start getting some weird stuff. Like all games, it has a pile of FAQs. Sort of, they've closed down the community forums as far as I'm aware, but it's always been a game that's been very tight in the way it's meant to be played and how it plays on the table. I've never once seen players argue playing in the spirit of a faction compared to the rules of that faction. Now, I don't necessarily think that means that the factions are all designed to play like they do in the stories. I think it's less important for the players that they play in the stories like they perform in the stories as it does on the table. So I also think there's a disconnect there for players in some cases where this talks about playing the spirit of the game. Does that mean that you should be building armies and forces that are within the stories and the spirit of the game as they're written? Or when you start removing restrictions for tournament play and you start going, okay, you can have this many detachments with this many points with this, and people make the most hardcore armies they can to go and win, and then people cry foul. Like, you've given them the restrictions, it's a competition.
Yeah, but I think that that's different. I don't think that making a hardcore army is necessarily the same as exploiting loopholes or trying to break the game.
But the second part of this question was, do you think it's enough to trust people to play in the spirit? Now, is that in the spirit of the rules, in the spirit of the game, in the spirit of the, like there's a few different ways you can take that.
And I guess that's difficult because we don't have Tim here, but that was my next question for you. How do we define what in the spirit means?
Well, so in the spirit of the game, so using 40K as the example, you could argue that the spirit of that game is to recreate stories based within the 40K universe. And I think you could probably argue that for Age of Sigmar, for War Machine, for
I think pretty much
any
for
of those
most of
those games that have a narrative story that sits behind them, Malifaux, you name it.
Mm-hmm.
In the spirit of, for me at least, means that. So gaming the system doesn't necessarily mean the same thing as playing within the spirit of the game, because the spirit of the game for me would change the way you build armies, would change the tone of the game.
See, I guess for me, if you're playing in the spirit, it feels like you're playing the way that you think the game was intended to be played.
Well, that's the second part of the answer.
Rather than, so I guess that's different. It feels to me like that's different. That you're playing the game the way that it was written and intended, rather than going, you know what, this is written this way. If I come at it from this aspect, from this, perspective, then I can get around that. And I know that that's not what they meant when they wrote this.
Yeah.
But, for example, who says the bases have to be on the ground?
Oh, God, yes, yeah.
Well, it's a base. That's what base means.
Look, there's a really good example at the moment, which I've been arguing with friends for 40K, and this is actually something that was brought up for ATC, the Australian Team Challenge that's happening at show this year. The community for Games Workshop 40K released a picture that goes, these are the best stratagems at the moment to go and try. And one of them was Agents of Vect. Now, anyone who plays 40K competitive probably knows where I'm about to go with this. Agents of Vect is the only stratagem in the game that doesn't target either your unit or an opponent's unit. It just happens. It's listed as a Cabal of the Blackheart stratagem. But unlike every other stratagem in the game that requires you to target a friendly model with the same keyword, in this case, Cabal of Blackheart, this just says, use the stratagem. So people have been arguing, hey, I don't need to have a Cabal of the Blackheart because it doesn't target a Cabal of the Blackheart, so I can just use it with any Dark Elder army. The community team released a picture that said, hey guys, remember to get access to this stratagem, you need a Cabal of the Blackheart detachment. And everyone went, oh, perfect, they've answered it. Ignoring the way that was delivered to the community, the problem with that reception within the community, it creates an inconsistency.
Mm-hmm.
So the argument then goes, well, hang on a minute. If I need a detachment to get that stratagem, surely that ruling would apply to every faction. Why is it specific for just that one stratagem, which is a 1/9 of the stratagems in that one book out of 30? So logically, if I want to get the Siam Han Craftwood Eldar stratagems, I need to have a Siam Han detachment.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
That's not ruled anywhere. The only one that's limited at the moment is Blackheart. So there are plenty of people rejoicing at that, going, that means every Dark Eldar player can't use Blackheart. And when I pointed out, hang on a minute, it should, if it was good enough for them, it should be good enough for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
I was met with a wall of hatred and, no, that's just wrong. They haven't said that anywhere. And I've gone, well, the logical leap at this point is, I feel like that's the intent. Now that they've come out and put that limit on one sub-faction of a sub-faction of one faction, it feels like that's the intent all along. And I think we all kind of subconsciously know that we shouldn't be trying to mix and match to get those sorts of little combos. But that's the way it works. And without that community image that says, hey, you need this, then yeah, you could have had it with any Dark Elder army. But on top of that, the community article also says that they're not official rules writers, which creates another paradox where people are trying to use it as a rule and not. At that point, I would say the spirit of the game should mean that the spirit of the rules, as in the intent of the rules, for me feels like that ruling should essentially apply to everyone. If you want the Ultramarine specific stratagems, then you have to have an Ultramarines detachment. If you want a Tau Sept stratagem, then you have to have a Tau Sept detachment. But I've been met with overwhelming voices of, no, that's not the way it should work. That's not the way it does work, because that's not what the rules say. When I counter with, that's not what the rule says for Vect either, but you're applying that, then I get met with, well, that's what the Games Workshop have said. And it creates this weird paradox where I feel like, for me, they've spelled out an intent, and whether you like the community side of things or not, whether you take them as official or not, it at least gives an angle of intent. So it feels like, well, they've shown us that the intent for those faction-specific stratagems are you have to have a detachment of that faction. The logical leap at that point is it applies to all. And I think that's kind of where the spirit of the game is lost a little, because you can't have your cake and eat it too. In my head, if you're going to play to a spirit for one thing, you should be applying that to everything. So, but that's not the way it works. We're so caught up with tournaments that it's got to be as close to the way the book is written as possible, rules is written, that we sometimes don't have clear answers, and you sometimes get contradictory answers because the rules writers change and the rules evolve and grow as new books come out. So
yeah, and I think an example's come up for Southern Hemisphere Open there's a rule in Age of Sigmar that says that the terrain has to be Games Workshop terrain. And, some of the terrain that will be on our tables isn't Games Workshop terrain, so therefore it doesn't count.
It's not terrain, yeah.
Yeah. No, it does count. It's counting.
Yeah.
So,
That's certainly outside of the spirit of the game in my head.
Yeah, but that's what I mean about exploiting loopholes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And being, I'm trying to think of a politically correct term that I can use here. A stickler for the rules. Let's go with that. And being very...
I was going to say stick, but not what you were saying.
You're really precise and reading it exactly as written rather than...
Without intent and without, I suppose...
Common sense.
Common sense is a funny one. I think all gamers, to some degree or another, are selective in the way they read things, because obviously...
all people are selective in the way they read things.
What I mean is they will read things to their own advantage wherever they possibly can, as long as it's not advantaging their opponent.
But that's just human nature.
I suppose it is.
We all want,
the best for ourselves.
Exactly.
Yeah. But I definitely think that there's a really weird sort of space that operates within all the game systems to some degree or another. And a lot of them are getting better as the years go on in terms of correcting the issues and fixing them. And Games Workshop, to their credit, have been getting better at it as well. They're nowhere near where games like War Machine and Malifaux are, where you've either got a really tight rule set or you've got a really active community that the company listens to and is proactive in addressing errors and fixing and publicly play testing and beta testing and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Games Workshop's not quite there yet, but they're also a much bigger organisation with a bigger set of issues around their games.
Yeah, and a much broader scope for games as well.
Yeah.
So,
but no, look, I think the spirit of the game is definitely twofold in that regard. There's a couple of different ways you can tackle that sort of phrase.
So with that, I guess with those two definitions in mind, I don't know whether or not to have a discussion around trust now, but I think before we do that, what hard and fast rules could be implemented?
See, from an organiser's perspective, you do your best you can with the players pack that you provide to your players.
Yeah, I guess the difficulty is that you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And and I was having a conversation about this earlier today as well, in that when you write a players pack, and when I write a players pack, because I've done my first players pack now, so I'm like...
It counts, yeah.
Totally. You're on like 200 and I've done one, but still, I'm totally up there with you now. So, but when you write a players pack, you do it with a certain amount of knowledge that you go in with it, but also you know what you mean when you're writing this players pack.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's really difficult to try and read something objectively and go, well, for somebody who doesn't know what I'm holding in my mind, is this clear for them?
The funny thing is, though, that even when, like, I have a habit of sending out players packs to a handful of people.
Yeah, but you tend to send it out to experienced tournament players as well.
Yeah, well, and in theory that makes sense because you're hoping that they spot things that you've forgotten. The problem is, of course, that they also have that
come with that common knowledge,
where they kind of read between the lines a little bit and understand history of what we've done. And
well, sometimes it's not even reading between the lines. It's just that they're coming in with prior knowledge that perhaps a newer player or a returning player doesn't necessarily have.
Yeah. And we still get questions like 3 years on from our first major tournament, or nearly 4 years since that first tournament, actually.
3.
We still get questions around, stuff that I think is, laid out clearly and succinctly.
Mm-hmm.
And it just takes a new set of eyes to sometimes read it literally to go, what does this mean?
And we saw an example of it, actually it was a little while ago now. I think it was at Outpost with a heresy game. And, you're watching a game going, oh, actually, I don't think that's how that works. But the information had been passed on from one person to another to another without necessarily going back and checking what it actually said in the rule book. And so sometimes when information is relayed, there's small changes and you end up with this case of Chinese whispers. And by the time it's gotten to the 6th, 7th person who this has been relayed to, it's not necessarily how it was written or intended.
It's also that thing where, okay, that's the way we play it. Cool. And you never bother to go and read it because someone else has told you that you trust.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that happens with so many rules adjudications at tournaments where someone asks you a question. Actually, we had it at doubles. Someone came and said to me, where's this rule? Am I right with this rule? And I've gone, yep, you're right. And then 2 minutes later had his opponent in front of me going, where does it say that? Show me. And I showed him and he went, oh, I've never seen that. And I've gone, well, that FAQ's been out a year now. Oh, I've never played it like that. Oh, okay. So again, for his case, it was, I didn't know that existed. So how am I meant to know? So it felt like a bit of a gotcha moment for him. But at the same time, his opponent was well aware of those rules and was correct. And his opponent had to live with that as a ruling. But at the same time, I think he felt a little bit put out by that because hang on a minute, I'm sure I can do that.
And very unlike us, we've gone off on a tangent again. So back to the actual question, what hard and fast rules could be implemented?
I don't think there's anything you can do from, like I say, with the TOs, you do the best you can and you try and answer what you can. There's often a lot of public FAQs for these games by the manufacturers to try and answer, hopefully all the questions. They, depending on the company, will cover them all or will have a few grey spots in them. Or the answers will provide more grey spots in them. I think all you can do as an organiser is be consistent with application of how you rule those grey spots for everyone at the event and, try and be consistent and make that ruling known until something contrary comes out.
Yeah, and so I think it's been suggested before, and I think it's a good idea, and you're not necessarily a fan of the idea, but whether or not we need to create some kind of TO's FAQ. And the pitfall of that is that we definitely don't want to move to a place where we're creating our own rules and at OBSEC tournaments, this is how we do things. Because we want to be playing within the spirit of the game and the way that it's written.
But we also want to be playing like everyone else in the world.
Well, yes, exactly. But I also think that, for example, the issue that I raised before about the Age of Sigmar terrain, is it worth having that written somewhere? So that everybody is aware going into it that you can't ignore the terrain because it's not Games Workshop terrain.
But that in my mind is common sense.
Yes, but we talked about the fact that common sense is not necessarily common.
No, but at the same time...
And also people want to...
I think that's a different thing, though, between a rules query and a comment in a rule book that says treat Games Workshop terrain as terrain, treat Games Workshop terrain models as terrain, with no references to homemade terrain, where the 40k book still has references to that sort of stuff. I don't know that there's a need... But
is that not what this whole thing is about exploiting loopholes?
I think if you went to a tournament, if you were a complete newbie at a tournament and you had only ever played with Games Workshop terrain, first of all, I think I'd almost call you a liar because everyone starts with books on the tables and, bits of foam and cardboard and all the rest of it for terrain before you can afford to go and buy anything fancy.
Because all the money's going into the models,
exactly.
Not the terrain.
If you honestly thought when you got into this hobby, I have to only use Games Workshop terrain, and you then went and dropped all that money on it and then came to your first tournament and were surprised that it wasn't all Games Workshop terrain, I reckon you would be the rarest of hen's teeth.
But we're not talking about somebody actually thinking that. I'm talking about somebody trying to exploit a rule. I'm not saying that the person who brought this up was trying to exploit a rule. I'm using this as an example.
They flagged it to us to basically go, hey, did you know this?
Yeah.
And I went, any TO I know of in the world, if you took that to them at an event and said, hey, this table's only got 2 Games Workshop pieces of terrain in it, so I can ignore this tree and that tree. Any TO in the world that said, yeah, you're 100% right on that, go for it, I don't think that person exists. I honestly think that any TO would just go, you what? Bugger off. Go back to your table. Like, I don't think it'd get past any sort of conversation other than you're taking the piss, aren't you?
And I think when you look at the spirit of the game, for me, the way that's written is that a piece of Games Workshop terrain has to be used as terrain, so you can't have a tree as your
I think it was just trying to define the difference between a model in your army.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
And a model that's
because
on the table that's doing something else.
Prior to, I know we've had this conversation before, where there was you could choose, your commander could actually be a tree or, that kind of thing. So I guess the way that I understand that being written is that terrain is terrain and a model is a model.
Yeah. It's a little bit more blurry in 40k because of the way data sheets and fortifications work, but at the end of the day, yeah, look, I get what you're saying in terms of trying to exploit a loophole, but I don't think if you honestly went to a tournament and you expect...
No, I'm using that as an example. Yeah. I'm not suggesting that that's the only one, but I'm using it as because it's a really clear-cut example.
Yeah, but I suppose for me it's also a clear-cut example of common sense prevailing, where I don't think anyone would ever go to an event assuming that was the case. If they
Okay, what about the one where debasers have to be on the floor?
Look, I think that's probably a better one where they go, well, the rulebook doesn't say it. I have to put them flat on the flat standing up, and the rulebook doesn't say that you don't have to do that. But the rulebook's games are always permissive. Games always tell you what you can do, not what you can't do. So it doesn't say I can't isn't a good argument for anything in a game, at least. If you're talking strictly rules, the game doesn't tell me that I can't automatically win by rolling a d6 and getting a number between 1 and 6. It doesn't have to. It tells me how I win the game. You know what I mean? Like, you can take that to an extreme where the rulebook doesn't say that I can't punch you in the face and automatically win the game. Like, the rules tell you what you can do, not what you can't do. So it's the way games have always worked. It's permissive. So I don't know. I think it all ties back to common sense as well as, like, for rules loopholes in particular. Like, there's a lot of them that are common sense and there's a lot of them that aren't. And the ones that aren't are the problems that we hit, like Vect and like... I mean, the terrain one, the more I think about it, is actually not a terrible one because there is so much published terrain for different game systems these days. I mean, look at the Weirdscapes that Malifaux just released. Like, they're beautiful terrain. Really cool. All tiles and everything, and I haven't seen the rules for them yet, but I'm sure there will be rules at some point for fighting inside buildings and that sort of thing. So they might already have them already. I haven't seen the latest rulebooks yet. But I think as games get more and more complex with more and more interactions, there are more and more opportunities for people to game the system in that way.
But can you think of any way to come up with like hard and fast rules to stop that happening? Other
than sticking to your guns as a TO, applying your own common sense and reasoning, and then relying on the game's designers to try and do the best they can, which we all know is a mixed bag for any game system. I don't know there's any hard and fast rules you can apply. I mean, we tend to stick to as close to rules as written as possible. And if there is a rule that references it in an FAQ, then we tend to just use it as it's answered in the FAQ. We also tend to try and apply reasoning outside of an FAQ answer to make sense of other things and use them as precedents if we can.
If not, we'll just make it up. No,
look,
I'm
there's
kidding. But
sometimes you have to.
At times that's it. Yeah, and that comes back to what do we think the intent of the game is?
Yeah. There's been plenty of rules that I've ruled in the past and then gone away and found the actual answer, and plenty of them I've been right, and plenty of them, like months later, I've been proven wrong because they've released an FAQ and they've gone, no, this is the way we want it to run. And at the time, it made perfect sense for me to rule it that way because it made sense. And then they've completely gone a 180 when they've actually given us an answer. I was wrong in retrospect, but I couldn't... And that's part of the problem is unless you are the writer of the rules, you have no way of gauging intent. And you have to then use other precedents as an example to try and decide what intent might be. We know that Games Workshop, and we were talking about this with the new Cities of Death buildings, and you were commenting that we have to block up windows and stuff on these ruins because
Commenting, yeah, let's go with commenting.
this is ridiculous. Why should I be having to modify models that they supply?
Yeah, I still stand by that comment.
My response to that was, and still is, I think Games Workshop intends you to play a balanced, themed, narrative-style game, and we only see those issues come up in matched play because the armies tend to be more focused, they tend to be more competitive than you were bringing one of everything or bringing something that's recreating a story that only had bolt guns instead of las cannons and missile launchers and sniper rifles, which obviously require line of sight blocking. And I think there's a disconnect there between looking like the models looking cool and Games Workshop's perception of how you play the game compared to our regular environment of playing the game, which is competitive. So
I feel like that's a whole other conversation. It just feels really big, I'll be honest.
Look, it is.
It is, because it goes down that whole thing of, well, we're talking about playing with intent, to the intent and the spirit of the game. Well, if this is how they're intending the game to be played, then actually are we playing the game as it's intended, or are we creating, and not us as a,
community.
As a community and as a worldwide community, is the community creating a whole new game system in order to create this competitive play?
Well, the thing is, though, they've given us matched play and they've given us the rules for this sort of stuff. So it's almost like, for me, for 8th edition, for 40k at least, it feels like this is the way the game was played with points values and all the rest of it since the dawn of 40k. Yeah. And it feels like it's been included, and it's, I assume, the way the majority of people play it. Even pickup games, you see people using points and using the match play missions. I think Games Workshop have kept it on there because that's kind of what the community expected, and they certainly saw that when they released Age of Sigmar without any of the points and without any of that sort of stuff. So I don't see.
Yeah, that was.
I don't see that going anywhere at all in terms of what they released to the community. I think it's a product of us taking that matched play format to do tournaments, and then growing it out to 500 players like LVO has, and turning it into a sport.
But even with 2 players, you still, so a local pickup game, you put a post on a local group's Facebook page and go, hey, I'm coming down on X night, who's up for an 1850 point game? You would still expect there to be terrain with line of sight blocking.
Yeah. I suppose, though, again, it comes down to investment at that point, because if I'm at a tournament, I have an expectation that it's going to be a fair game, that there's going to be terrain, that there's going to be this, that, and the other. There's a level of, for me at least, there's a level of more relaxed banter when it comes to a pickup game. Like I went down to Crags, one of the local clubs here a few weeks ago. The guy put a post in one of the group chats. Anyone up for a game, 1850, anyone keen? I've gone, yeah, sure, no worries. I was going down the club that night. I wanted a game. And I said, cool, what's the format? And he went, huh? I mean, what's the format? What does that mean? Oh, I mean, how many detachments? Are we playing standard missions? Are we playing this? Are we playing that? All those sorts of conversations that you'd have before you actually play the game. And he was a new player, had no expectations of any of that whatsoever.
He just had 1,850 points.
He had an army of 850 points he'd got from starter boxes, and he wanted to put it on the table.
Yeah.
And as soon as I uncovered that, for me at least told me what his intent for the game was. It was, I'm a new player, I want to put all my cool models on the table and blow stuff up. I'm not that fussed on anything else because I haven't given... If he'd come back and said match play this, that and the other, then I would have gone, okay, he's taking it more seriously. But as soon as I realised that he was a newer player, I went, okay, cool. And I took down a cool, fun army. We played out 4 turns and ran out of time. And, we both had a laugh. It was a good game. I had really enjoyed that game because we both had that same level of expectation, I suppose.
Yeah, but that still doesn't talk to the point that I had about the fact that even with match play in a casual environment, you would still expect the terrain to...
But see, I didn't, though. That's kind of my point. I didn't expect a line of sight blocking stuff because I went into the game with less competitive investment, I suppose. I wasn't going down to compete, even though we were using match play rules.
You're just going down to shoot.
Yeah, to
guns.
blow stuff up. It's the same as the Apocalypse game every year. We set all these rules and then ignore them within about 30 minutes because we just want to blow up big tanks.
Mm-hmm.
I think part of it, in terms of your point there, is also to do with expectation.
It is, but we've gone off topic, so that's okay. I think probably coming back to the topic, I can't think of any hard or fast rules that we could actually implement in order to get people to stick to the spirit of the game. So I think it comes down to the fact that we do have to trust people to play within the spirit of the game or the intent
of the rules.
Yeah. And
even building armies. Like, we've tried putting really harsh limits on how you build armies and how many of this and that and the other. There've been comp systems that have been set up and gone over the years to try and limit what you can and can't take to make the game more fair and play within the narrative kind of army building. None of it works. I mean, we're trying out a Highlander format for show for the last day, for Last Blood. And I got an email today from a local player going, hey, can you just double check that this is legal? And it was a HQ 3 fast attacks, but the codex only has 1 fast attack choice. So he meets the criteria for Highlander to take 3 of them. It's 10 models. It's 970 points. I know exactly how he upgrades it to 1,000. And I sent him back an email and said, look, yep, it's completely legal. We even talked about this online. We actually had this conversation. However, I would strongly suggest you go away and think about the format and what I'm not going to stop you taking it, because I can't in good conscience put another ban on there just for some player finding the same loophole that we found a few weeks earlier. But I said to him, I'm not going to stop you, but I'd strongly suggest you go and have a think about what we're trying to achieve with the event and what the intent of the event is, not just to come along and smash face. Now, I'm not going to penalise him. I'm not going to do anything to him if he takes the list he sent me or not, because it feels disingenuous to do that after we published a player's pack and had that conversation and all the rest of it. And I probably could, but I'm not going to.
Well, no, because that might be his only army.
It's not. I know the player in question. But yes, I get your point. So, yeah. But you're right, going back to trust, and I suppose that this kind of ties into that as well, because I have to trust that this player will take that information on board and maybe go away and try something different. And
if he doesn't try something different, play within the the intent of the game with that particular army. And I guess, we have to trust that people are going to play within the intent of the game. And if something happens that feels like that's not happening, then we encourage players to talk to us so that we can have that conversation.
I saw a post yesterday, on one of the Facebook groups I'm in, that's basically was whinging about Forge World, and no, not for the prices. They were whinging because Forge World's the Power Gamers world, and you can't even play a game and ask to see the rule book because no one's got them. And I said, if you're playing against someone with you have to be able to trust your opponent, and if you think that and you don't think it's right, then you have to be able to ask to see the rules and then have that conversation.
And that's something I've just created a banner for Southern Hemisphere Open around players' responsibilities. And it's something that we've talked about, I think, over 2 episodes on this podcast. But one of the responsibilities is that if you have questions, ask them courteously and in a timely manner. So if you don't think that something that your opponent's doing is right, check it out with them.
Yeah.
Don't just whinge about it behind their back. But if I come back to the original question, where do you stand on the idea that gamers always try to game the system?
I don't think they do.
Okay, that's interesting, because on the night you said absolutely they do. And I don't think they do either. And I think the big key for me is the word always. I think you will have some gamers that try and game the system.
Yep.
And you would have the vast majority of the gamers that I have met would game within the intent and within the spirit of the game.
Depending on the environment.
Well, exactly. So and that's the intent of the writers and the spirit of the event with which they are attending.
Yeah. LVO is a very different thing to a local club tournament.
I've never been to LVO, so I said the gamers I've met.
Yeah. Oh, the gamers I met at LVO were awesome. I didn't have a problem with any of them. It was a great weekend.
And I wonder, and again, I know I'm going off topic, but I wonder how much of what actually happens that we hear about, how much of that is not checking it out, how much of it is not having open communication and being clear, and, you know, how much of it is actually happening and how much of it is anecdotal evidence after the fact.
Yeah, I mean the gotcha moments that happened at LVO.
Obviously, that's on video, so I'm fairly sure that happened. But
that's a good example of intent, where in the first instance, the player who pulled the gotcha was deliberately using his opponent's clear intent.
Okay, we can't say he was deliberately doing it because we don't actually know what he was thinking. You're making an inference based on what you've seen. I'm inferring
based on the video and what he says, and at the start of the video and during the play, that he knew what his opponent's intent was, and then chose to supplement that intent and create a situation where he could then turn around and say, aha, you can't do that now.
Yeah.
And by the same token, his opponent in the following round did essentially the same thing back to him, citing, well, you played it that way last round, so if you hadn't done that, I'm going to play it this round. So in a way, that his second opponent was actually playing to intent based on his opponent's previous behaviour. And how much of a person's previous behaviour can you let into your inference of their intent within a game?
That's a whole other conversation.
We're talking psychology now. We've got a couple of psychs who are in gaming. We could get one of them to come and talk about intent and...
No one wants to hear psychs talk.
Unless you obviously need them.
I'm joking because my background is in psych, and I work in the area of mental health, and I am joking. I love all the psychologists that are part of my life. Yeah.
Well, have we got anything else to cover for this topic? Because it feels like this could go around in circles and off here, there and everywhere.
No, I think I did my summation and then you kept talking.
Oh, okay.
You want me to do it again?
Yes, go on, so we can wrap this up.
So my wrap-up is basically that, no, I think that we do have to trust people to play within the intent of the game and the spirit in the gaming event that they're attending.
Awesome. That was almost succinct.
Almost. It's about as succinct as I get. Now stop talking. We're going to take a break and then we're going to come back and wrap this episode up. We're back to wrap this episode up.
Go on then.
I've got nothing.
Right, so
when we started this episode, before we started this episode, Mike said, I don't think we'll have enough to, fill out a whole episode with just this one question. I was like, are you kidding? We could talk underwater with a mouthful of marbles for an hour, no problem. And look, we've done it.
Well, if you're listening to this now, we're probably about 50 minutes in, so
we just need to babble on for another 10 and we're all good.
Well, I don't know about babble on. See, you've stopped talking now.
I know. I'm not babbling.
Well, yeah, we've tried to answer this topic, and Tim, if you are listening,
I don't think we really did it.
No, it's obviously a very complex topic, and it's one that we've kind of walked around in circles and come up with more questions than we really had answers. But it's certainly one worth thinking about. And when you go to an event or pick up a game or any other sort of gaming situation, how do you deal with the intent across the table? Do you deal with it strictly rules as written? Do you make allowances and make it more fun? How do you deal with your opponents, and how dependent on is the environment you're playing in? It's a very interesting one. If you start sort of self-reflecting on your own attitudes and behaviours at the gaming table, you might be surprised.
Oh, now there's a whole other topic. What do you think the average gamer's ability to be reflective is?
So this is why we need another psych on, so the two of you can chat, and I can sit there as the guinea pig, because I know that's what will happen.
Oh, honey, I use you as my guinea pig all the time.
I know.
But self-reflection is something that I do find really interesting, and I know that I've gone off on a tangent, but you brought it up, so it's your fault.
I will point out I'm referring to behaviour, not how did the game go, because I think gamers reflect on how the game went.
Do you think? Because when I've asked you about it, you don't.
What do you mean?
So when we do the we were doing, we are going to go back to them. When we were doing the battle reports, I would be asking you questions like, what were you thinking during this point, and how did you change your thinking? You'd be like, I don't know. I just do stuff. If it works, great. If not, I do something else.
No, my tactical brilliance is just...
Tactical brilliance, yes. Well, your tactical brilliance doesn't allow much time for self-reflection.
No, but the problem is that I don't get a chance to reflect when we do those because we record those back to back to back, and it's only as I dissect the game in my head over the following week.
Oh my God, I'm not waiting a week.
Exactly. So you're asking me questions about something that I haven't had a chance to digest and process and consider and weigh up and balance and shift and all the rest of it.
Anyway, what do you think gamers' ability to reflect on behaviours and intent, and what do you think that is? I don't know. I'm asking a sweeping statement.
I don't know. I think that when people pull you up on behaviour and that sort of stuff, and you have a confrontation, I think you're more likely to be self-reflective later in the day after you get over your own aggravations and depending on how it's leveled at you, whether it's an accusation or whether it's a comment or whether it's and how it's delivered. I think all of that comes into the way you would reflect on it. Because if you come away from a table where someone accuses you of cheating and you're proven innocent, you're going to come away with less self-reflection because you've been vindicated rather than you've been vilified and then been vindicated in your stance. So I think a lot of it comes down to the situation.
It's a sweeping statement. You can't answer it because it's different for each individual.
So why did you ask me?
I don't know, it popped into my head. Filling up the 10 minutes. Not really. It did actually pop into my head, so it came out my mouth. Apparently I have no filter.
Well, not tonight anyway.
No.
All right, well, it was an interesting question. If you have any other sort of those metaphysics, psychology questions, feel free to shoot them through to us.
Sure, it was a metaphysics question.
Behavioural,
which does
attitudinal.
bring up, yeah, and we did talk about whether or not we were going to do a topic off the back of an article that was released about the psychology of gaming, but we decided that perhaps we
bit of a touchy subject, that one.
Yeah, we might stay away from that. So.
But if you do have any of these sorts of questions where it's
I just want to listen to our rambling thoughts as we process the question.
A topic that's a bit deeper than how many points should this weapon be worth, or who wins in a fight between a witch elf and a Sylvaneth treekin. Like, give us something we can sort of sink our teeth into in regards to attitudes, behaviour, sportsmanship, conduct, any of those sorts of topics that you've seen us explore in the last 20-something episodes. Get in touch, send it through on an email, on Facebook, however you want to get in touch. And we'd be really keen to explore those topics. If you've got your own point of view, if you've actually got an answer to that question, that's even great.
Give us the answer first.
Well, but it allows us to then think about it from other points of view. It allows us to explore it through having these... I know I do at least. I will look at some of these questions and talk to them with other gamers in my circle and see what their thoughts are before we come to an episode.
I've been talking for a whole week about doing this episode and covering this topic. Why did you not talk to anybody?
I did. We talked about this 3 weeks ago on the live stream.
Your answer was absolutely Tim.
I'm still going to go and check that because we are recording this whole episode sort of concurrently. I haven't been able to go back and check to see exactly what I said, but I'm going to go and look.
It was absolutely Tim.
I'm going to go and find it.
Okay. You find it. And you clip it in there.
Well, if I do clip it in here, I'll put it here towards the end when no one's when the outro music starts, no one hears it because they turn the episode off. I don't think anyone listens to the whole part of the outro music, so I can hide.
I doubt they're listening to this now.
You'd be surprised. Anyway, guys, we hope you are all enjoying your gaming at the moment. We're going to be at show in just under 4 weeks' time.
Come and say hello
to
us.
If you're in Perth, Western Australia, come and say hello. We'll be the man.
If you're not
people.
in Perth, Western Australia, get on a plane.
Yeah.
Coming over. There's lots of people coming from interstate, overseas.
The podcast, we're going to try and keep to the Wednesdays, but we'll see how that goes as we get closer to show. And we
see how our sanity goes as we get, because we're due one in a
the week before the event.
Oh, we should be fine. 2 days before the event, who knows how we'll be, but
I'll be lugging heavy objects probably.
Not on Wednesday night, you won't.
But we're also going to try and obviously be live on Facebook throughout the event. We'll try and get some of the games streamed. There's a whole bunch of questions and tech stuff that we've still got to sort through over the next week or so.
Yeah, and
We might even try and do some recording live and splice together an episode.
I do a fair amount. Well, last year I can't say I do because it makes it sound like every year when we do this, do a fair few videos over the weekend. So if there's different things that you want to see, or if you've got questions that you would like covering, it's generally me that will be kind of behind the camera or on the camera because Mike pretends to be busy.
I'm only running like 5 tournaments a day this year.
I'm sorry, you stand there for most of it.
I do not.
And everybody does everything through down under pairings.
Don't you start that with me.
Anyway, so if you've got questions or anything like that, shoot them through. We'll do my best to answer them or video what you want videoing.
We might even do some interviews with the audio gear while we're down there at the end of the day with some of the winners for the events. And, we might be able to give you some feedback from the horse's mouth, as it were, for the different events.
Only if they say good things.
I'm sure they can. I can edit it and post. It's fine. Until episode 26, though, stay safe, enjoy your gaming, and we will catch you on the next episode.
Happy gaming.
Hi, guys. So I dug back through the audio from the live stream that we did on Wednesday about 3.5 weeks ago now, or 3 weeks ago, and I'm going to play the clip. I've taken out the bits and pieces around it and some of the side tracks, but the comment is still intact. So for the purposes of this podcast, yes, I've given you the whole comment that I made, and I don't say absolutely. I might go down the road kind of like that, but I don't say absolutely, so it's nice to be vindicated. Enjoy. Now, we actually had another question while I think of it, which kind of ties into what we're talking about now. Well, hang on, I've got one here from Tim. Where do you stand on the whole idea that gamers always try to game the system? Do you think it's enough to trust people to play in the spirit, or do you think more hard and fast rules are needed to be adopted? Yes, they need to be adopted. Because
Really?
gamers always
How
try
do
and
you
game the
adopt
system.
it?
That's my next statement, was it's impossible to police.
Yeah, I just think that
Without physically sitting there and saying custodies may not take 3 of this or 2 of this or 1 of this.
Yeah, so I think we just have to go with trying to set the
They'll always-
expectation.
I think there'll always be someone who tries to work outside of that, but I think that in an ideal world, yeah, you'd give them strict restrictions and stuff, but I just don't know how you'd police that.
No, I don't know how you would either.
People don't read the players' packs as it is. You've been listening to the Objective Secured podcast. If you'd like to get in touch, you can visit our website, objectivesecured.com.au. You can find us on Facebook, Facebook.com/Objective Secured, or you can email us, obsec@optusnet.com.au. Thanks for listening.